Tracking a new storm lineup. In fact, a couple of storm systems in the Pacific that are about to bring a return to a wetter pattern to California. The deal is, at this point in the season, can we store more water? We're going to be digging into some of the storage capacities, bottlenecks, and issues that we're facing after a fairly wet February. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods. We do have a weather impact alert in store for the weekend as well. Weak little weather feature kind of cut off from the main system is pushing towards Southern California. This is going to bring an increase in cloud cover, just kind of setting the stage for that high pressure ridge to start to weaken. A high pressure ridge, by the way, that is bringing us highs in the 70s and some 80s throughout parts of the state. A little bit of high cloud cover, but all in all, no precipitation expected, at least to wrap us up for the month of February. We're going to keep it dry. In the short-term forecast, we have a return to fog to start us off for the weekend. But here's where things get interesting. By the end of Saturday, we're bringing in not only more clouds, but also a bit of precipitation, and that is somewhat opening up the storm door for a wetter start to March. In terms of total rainfall, it's on the weaker side, about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of rain in the valley. Not a huge whopper of a storm for March, about 1 inch or so for parts of the foothills, but it's a much colder weather system as well. So we are going to be talking about the potential for snowfall down to about 3,500 to 4,500 feet by early next week. Total accumulation, again, nothing that is going to be eye-popping or anything. About 2 to 5 inches of snow roughly. For California, that's not a lot in March. But again, this is falling on the heels of some highs in the 70s for the valley. Plus, we're entering into March after a dry stretch in February. A lot of folks just put away the snow gear, the chains, everything, and they say, okay, spring is here. Not so fast. Be prepared if you're headed up into the high country. Again, snow expected for this year, and that will be right about the time we're getting one of our snow surveys again on Friday. We've got a whole weather playlist, by the way, on ABC 10 Plus with extended forecasts, just like what you're seeing here, as well as weather explainers, weather and climate specials. We're just now starting to plan for our next one. Our California Water Wasted is an Emmy Award-winning weather special, so you want to check that out on ABC 10 Plus. All right. Speaking of water wasted, let's talk about precipitation for the water year. Now, our water year in California runs from October 1st of one year all the way into September 30th of the following year. So we're right kind of in the heart of the current water year. February, it's been a great month for us, at least for Northern California. Southern California, at least, we finally ended that really not historic, but really incredible dryness. In some places, it has been historic and one of the driest starts to the water year. So for downtown Sacramento, 4.32 inches for the month. That's where we'll stand. We're going to end the month on a dry and warm note. The average is 3.63 inches. So when you take a look at the water year so far, we really needed the rain. January, by the way, is historically our wettest month. February and December come close, but it's just when you have that much of a dry January, it does pose some concern for what's to come for the rest of the water year. Because if we were to end things in January and kind of shut off the water from the Pacific, that would have meant some tougher decisions for water managers. As it turns out, February ended up being wetter than average. Even with the drier January, things are looking really good in terms of our total precipitation throughout much of the northern part of the state. One thing I think is a really important note, 75% of the precipitation from California falls from Sacramento northward. 75% of the use is south of Sacramento. So that's a really key factor here when we start digging into what the precipitation numbers actually mean for water supply when we need it. Statewide precipitation, again, the sheer numbers, it's been a pretty incredible water year for places north of I-80. So that's right along that line that runs from San Francisco through Sacramento up towards Truckee on the north side of Lake Tahoe. That's about the line of demarcation where 75% of the precipitation for the state falls, whereas south of that line, roughly speaking, it's not a definitive line. 75% of the usage is going to be south of that line. Agriculture, larger populations, So you kind of see what's happening here. We really have a very distinct line of different climate and variability. Thankfully, our largest reservoirs are in the northern part of the state. So the largest capacity to hold all that water is, in fact, where the rain and the snow has been falling. Northern Sierra, 107% of average to date. As far as our April 1st average, we're at 91%. So let's say we didn't get any more snow for the entire season. April 1st is kind of the date that water managers use where we start to see less in the way of snowfall and more in the way of snow melt. So things are, again, looking really good for that April 1st date for the Northern Sierra. Once we start to edge our way southward into the Central Sierra, we're at 82% of average to date, 71 for the Southern Sierra, and a little bit more lean for that April 1st number. Not horrible. It could be better. And snowpack is one of those amazing ways that we can store water when we don't need it. We do not need so much water right now. A lot of farms are idle or dormant, so agriculture isn't really needing as much water. Many of us aren't watering our lawns because we don't need to because it's been raining. It's once we dig into the late spring and summer season that we actually need more of that water. And that's at the point where this nature's kind of savings account of water is so nicely stored in the Sierra. It slowly meters out, fills our reservoirs when water demand is at its highest. And it's just this beautiful way of serving the state. So snowpack, good. Rainfall and runoff too early in the season can pose a difficult decision for water managers. Releasing water, keeping it in. How do you plan for storms that may come later in the season? We're in a delicate situation right now. Shasta is a good illustration of this. We had a prior drought just about 3 years ago. 2022-23 was a drought-busting year for us. So reservoirs filled up. The state was looking really good. We dug out of a dangerous situation. And then 2023-24 hit. It was another decent year. So now we're sitting in a place where, hey, things are still looking pretty good for our water. That being said, we do have that groundwater recharge program going on right now. So even if releases were happening, we could at least start to store things. But that is, for all intents and purposes, still in a phase where they're trying to navigate where the best places to store that water is. So some of the districts have determined, hey, we can store the water here. This is great. Send us the water. We'll put it here. But there's still a lot of layers to SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, that need to be put into place before we're kind of on cruise control with that. So our current status with Shasta, you can see we've been running above average. Here's 2022-23. So we started off really low and then we climbed because they could store the water. Here's the April 1st number that I'm talking about. This is right at the point that we get that snow melt. We typically see that peak, and then all the releases happen to serve the needs of the water for the state. And by the end of September, the end of the water year, those reservoirs are looking pretty low. But we started off higher than that the past 2 years. So water managers were preparing for, hey, we could head right back into that drought situation. That is true for many reservoirs. Trinity was sitting pretty low. They just did not favor that drought busting year. So they actually did need to climb in terms of the water supply. But Shasta, Oroville, Folsom, even Trinity now at 100 to 130+% of average to date. As we head farther to the south, New Melones, Don Pedro, San Luis, all at 100 to 130+% of average to date and sitting pretty full at this point. Keep in mind, we have not hit that April 1st date where we will see that snow melt happening. Millerton, a little bit lower, but we already talked about how the Southern Sierra is seeing a little bit lower precipitation numbers. And we really have seen kind of an incredible situation where the path of these atmospheric rivers have favored so much more of areas north of I-80 compared to areas south of I-80. I want to mention San Luis for a moment because that's a really interesting spot for us right now. It's a pumped off-stream reservoir, meaning water managers can have a lot of control with what to do with that water. Most of the precipitation is happening in the storage north of the state, or in the northern part of the state. We have been seeing releases. Here's what's been happening this year. Releases have had to happen. There are rules and regulations for how much water you can hold right now. We are in flood control season right now. If those reservoirs get too full, they've got to release it. And sometimes there's just no place for it to go downstream. So areas that are made to flood, these floodplains and bypasses, they're already at max capacity. You're pumping this water out and then it hits the delta. For those of you that don't know where that is, that's a wonderful spot right in, it's called the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So it's right here in between Sacramento and Stockton. And it's the area that has this beautiful biodiversity. Here's the San Francisco Bay. The idea is you got to keep that water fresh. Delta farmers need that water. So the salinity factor plays in here where you have to release a certain amount of water to kind of push against the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay water trying to intrude. Pacific Ocean's always going to rule out, right? If you don't kind of push that water out. What water managers can then do is put the pumps on that will send that water south into the San Luis Reservoir. But when that reservoir gets too full, then they can release water south. But again, farms are fairly idle right now. So people don't want to use their water allocations because they don't need the water right now. Plus, we have a lot of infrastructure problems with the California aqueduct. There's buckling, there's cracks in it. There's a lot being done with some maintenance, but because of subsidence, where we've overused groundwater, the aqueduct, which runs on gravity, has buckling. So you have these bottlenecks in the aqueduct and these canals that just quite frankly can't move the water like it's designed to do. So we've got a bit of an infrastructure problem there. It's being addressed, but that water then heads south. So we've got the aqueduct, we've got canals, we've got things that can transport this water. We've got the river system as well. It's just many of those channels cannot hold the volume of water that we are currently holding in Northern California. It is going to be an interesting spring season. I will just lay the foundation right now to see how this all unfolds. Here's a look at the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta inflow from the Public Policy Institute of California. They did a deep dive into the numbers. So again, we're taking the water from up north, pushing it either out to the bay or sending it down south. So from February 1st through the 18th, there were 5.4 million acre feet of water flowing into the Delta. That was due to releases and rainfall. Okay. Now we look at what was uncaptured outflow, what was sent out to the bay, and it was about 5.1 million acre feet. We met the Delta exports, we met the ecosystem requirements, we met what we needed to reduce the salinity coming into the Delta. So that is what was sent out to sea, and that is where the controversy comes in. We don't have enough storage south of the Delta to store water in wet years. Doesn't always happen, but that's where we're headed. I would guess that discussion would continue, especially using this as the catalyst, this year as the catalyst to talk more about what can we do to store water. Groundwater is one of the ways, but it may be a very expensive conversation coming to California. Here's a look at our recent water years. This is the drought busting year I was mentioning, 2022-23, 26.25 inches for downtown Sacramento. I know that shows red here, but for all intents and purposes, we were only about an inch behind of what we normally get for the year. And we're on pace for even more water coming our way. Now, we haven't seen much change in the drought monitor week to week, but this is where we started off the year. A little bit on a dryness factor. We eroded that in Northern California, but again, growing drought in Southern California. We've been status quo for the week. This is the new one that just got released for today. So no change week to week. I like where these storms are headed, though, into this next week and even beyond. Here's a look at the timeline. Friday, it is shade territory, warm into February, though those changes are coming. Saturday, increasing clouds, cooler. Sunday, a weather impact alert day, valley showers, Sierra snow level 4,000 to 5,000 feet. It goes down to roughly 3,500 to 4,500 feet by Monday because of the active Pacific. that's brewing right now. So let's take a look at this. There's that little low. It's cut off from the main storm track, and it just rolls right through Southern California. A little bit more cloud cover, cooler, a few sprinkles here and there. But the main weather feature isn't going to move in until we get to our Sunday outlook. And this one does move its way into Southern California through Monday. I think Oscars are going to be fine, but certainly one to watch for Sunday. But beyond that, it does move pretty quickly through Southern California. Much needed rain in Southern California. I would say this, if we get the precipitation in California, areas that need it are in Southern California. They need natural occurring rain. They don't necessarily need the water deliveries right now, just based on the fact it's going to be hard to send that water southward. Our departure from normal, you can see we're well above average right now. Bit of snowmelt happening. Not anything that we're too concerned about. And then we head right into this cooler and wetter pattern. And that looks very likely to continue through almost the middle of March. So we, again, are starting to see more of a steady stream of moisture moving in from the Pacific. We've got a couple of storms that we're going to be tracking here into the extended forecast. And again, I like the path of where these are headed into Southern California. Instead of just hitting Northern California, Southern California doesn't get anything. Instead, we are going to see those kind of migrate their way southward. In fact, this Wednesday weather system I'm tracking, it does look like it is going to favor areas south of I-80. We have not seen that a lot at all this season. A more active weather pattern certainly would be helpful for Southern California and continue to suppress that fire danger that was so devastatingly high in January. Highs for our Friday forecast in the 50s for the Sierra, 60s and 70s for the foothills. We're in the 60s and 70s across the coast, so we squeeze out one more day of spring-like weather here in Northern California before we flip the switch into March and bring in much cooler, much more showery weather ahead for the mountains, the foothills, and along the San Francisco coast. 3-day forecast, we've got that weather impact alert day going on Sunday due to rain. It's not going to be super heavy. It's just that big transition of our weather pattern, and we'll continue to see the on and off showers, cooler weather all the way through the rest of that 10-day.